Elena Vasquez woke up to the same sound she had heard for 7 years, the wind howling against the metal walls of her research station. She lay in her narrow bed for a moment, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the building as it fought against another storm on Kepler 442c. The planet was supposed to be humanity's next home. Scientists on Earth had found it in the perfect zone around its star, not too hot and not too cold. They sent Elena and her team here to study the ground and prepare for the big terraforming machines that would make the air breathable and the soil fertile. But after 3 years of research, they learned the truth. This world was dying from the inside out. The core was cooling too fast and the magnetic field was getting weaker every year. Soon the deadly radiation from space would kill anything trying to live here. The evacuation order came on a Tuesday. Elena remembered that detail clearly, because it was the same day she had finally gotten her deep drilling equipment working properly. All her colleagues packed their gear and personal items onto the transport ships. Elena was supposed to leave on the last ship, but she asked for 2 more weeks to finish her geological surveys. The data was important, she argued. Future missions might learn something useful from her work. Captain Morrison had shaken his head. Elena, this place is a dead end. Command wants everyone out now. Just 2 more weeks, she had insisted. I can take the emergency pod back to the orbital station. Morrison finally agreed, but Elena could see the worry in his eyes. The emergency pod was old technology, barely tested on a world like this one. But Elena was stubborn, and her research meant everything to her. The pod exploded during launch. Elena watched from her station's observation window as the small ship turned into a ball of fire in the pale sky. She had been running final checks on her equipment when she heard the engine start up outside. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late to stop the launch sequence. The pod's computer had activated on schedule, but without her inside it. She tried to contact the orbital station, but the explosion had damaged her communication array. The debris field would make any rescue mission impossible for months, and by then the evacuation fleet would be long gone. Elena was alone on a dead world with no way home. That was 7 years ago. Elena got out of bed and walked to the main console. Her daily routine never changed. First, she checked the power levels. The fusion reactor was running at 60% efficiency, down from 62% last month. She made a note in her log. At this rate, she had maybe 5 more years before the reactor died completely. Next, she checked the air recycling system. The filters were holding up well, thanks to the modifications she had made using spare parts from the broken mining equipment. Elena had become an expert at fixing things with whatever she could find. When the food processor broke 3 years ago, she built a new one using components from the geological scanner. When the water purifier failed, she created a backup system using medical equipment and some creative plumbing. The weather station showed another storm building to the west. Elena had learned to read the planet's moods through her instruments. This storm would last 4 days and bring electromagnetic interference that would knock out her external sensors. She would have to bring in the portable equipment today. Elena suited up and stepped outside into the thin air. Even with her breathing mask, she could feel the cold biting at her exposed skin. The sky was the color of old rust, and the 2 small moons hung like pale coins above the horizon. In the distance, she could see the dark mountains where she had been drilling when the evacuation order came. She gathered the weather sensors and carried them inside, then sealed the station's storm shutters. The building would hold against the wind, but the electromagnetic pulses would play havoc with any electronics left outside. Elena had learned this lesson the hard way during her first year alone. Back inside, she prepared her daily meal. The protein cultures in the biolab were growing well, and she had managed to keep a small supply of vegetables alive in the hydroponics bay. The food was bland and repetitive, but it kept her healthy. She ate slowly, reading through her research notes on a tablet computer. Elena had not stopped working during her 7 years of isolation. She had mapped the planet's geological structure in detail, tracked the magnetic field decay, and documented the effects of the dying core on surface conditions. Her data was incredibly valuable, even if no one would ever read it. The work gave her purpose and kept her mind sharp. After lunch, she spent 2 hours exercising in the station's small gym. Staying in shape was crucial on a low-gravity world like this one. Without regular exercise, her bones would weaken and her muscles would waste away. Elena had seen what happened to the first colonists who ignored the exercise requirements. She would not make that mistake. The afternoon was for maintenance work. Today she needed to replace the filters in the water recycling system and check the seals on the main airlock. The constant temperature changes on this world were hard on the station's components. Metal expanded and contracted, rubber seals cracked, and electronic circuits failed without warning. Elena had become a master of preventive maintenance, fixing small problems before they became life-threatening emergencies. As evening approached, Elena climbed to the observation deck with a cup of synthetic coffee. This was her favorite time of day, when the two moons rose together and the sky turned deep purple. She could see for kilometers across the empty landscape, twisted rock formations, ancient riverbeds that had been dry for millions of years, and the distant glow of active lava flows on the southern continent. Sometimes she pretended that rescue ships would appear on the horizon. She had elaborate fantasies about the conversations she would have with the rescue team, the questions they would ask about her research, the hero's welcome she would receive back on Earth. But these dreams always faded as reality set in. The chances of anyone finding her on this forgotten world were essentially zero. Elena pulled out a small photo of her sister's family, the last picture she had received from Earth. Before the communication breakdown, her nephew would be 15 now, probably taller than his mother. Elena wondered if he still remembered his aunt who went to the stars. She wondered if her sister still looked up at the night sky and thought about her. The wind began to pick up as the storm approached. Elena finished her coffee and headed back inside to check the storm preparations one more time. She sealed the observation deck and activated the emergency lighting system. The next 4 days would be dark and noisy, but the station would protect her as it had for 7 years. Before going to bed, Elena made her final log entry of the day. She wrote about the approaching storm, the reactor efficiency numbers, and her plans for tomorrow's work. At the end, she added a personal note, something she had done every day since the evacuation. Day 557 alone on Kepler 442c. Still alive, still working, still hoping. If anyone ever reads this, know that Dr. Elena Vasquez did not give up. Humans don't give up. We keep going. Even when there's no logical reason to continue, we keep going because that's what makes us human. Elena closed the log file and turned off the lights. Outside, the storm was beginning to rage, but inside her small metal sanctuary, she was safe for another night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new repairs to make, new data to collect. She would face them all with the same determination that had kept her alive for 7 long years on a dead world. She was the last human on Kepler 442c, but she was still human, and humans endured. Elena was running a routine check on her communication equipment when she saw it. A small blip on the spectrum analyzer that should not have been there. She stared at the screen for a long moment, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. After 7 years of silence, the electromagnetic spectrum around Kepler 442c was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She ran the scan again. The blip appeared in the same place, a tiny spike of organized energy among the random noise of cosmic background radiation. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Random signals happened all the time. Stellar wind, magnetic field fluctuations, even her own equipment could create false readings. But this signal had structure. Elena spent the next 6 hours analyzing the data. She ran every test she could think of, checking for equipment malfunctions, solar activity, and atmospheric interference. Every test came back negative. The signal was real and it was artificial. The pattern was complex but clearly intentional. It started with a series of prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Then came mathematical constants, pi calculated to 50 decimal places, the golden ratio, Euler's number. Someone or something was broadcasting mathematics into space, using the universal language that any intelligent species would recognize. Elena's hands shook as she printed out the decoded sections. She had dreamed of this moment for 7 years, but now that it was happening, she felt terrified. The signal was weak and came in short bursts every few hours. To decode more of it, she would need to modify her equipment significantly. She worked through the night, stripping components from non-essential systems. The geological scanner donated its signal processing unit. The atmospheric monitoring station gave up its antenna array. Elena even cannibalized her emergency beacon, the device that was supposed to guide rescue ships to her location. If this signal was what she hoped it was, she would not need the beacon anymore. The modifications were dangerous work. Elena had to go outside during the electromagnetic storm to realign her satellite dishes. The wind tried to knock her over and lightning filled the sky with deadly energy. But she pushed forward, driven by 7 years of desperate hope. By morning, she had tripled the sensitivity of her communication array. When she ran the next scan, the signal came through much clearer. Elena gasped as she saw the full pattern for the first time. Hidden within the mathematical sequences were spatial coordinates, precise stellar positions marked to incredible accuracy. The coordinates did not point to Earth. They did not point to any of the human colonies Elena knew about. Instead, they indicated a position deep in space, far beyond the reach of human exploration. Elena checked and rechecked her calculations, but the result was always the same. The signal was coming from somewhere humanity had never been. Elena sat back in her chair, feeling a cold dread settle in her stomach. For 7 years, she had assumed that any signal she might detect would be from other humans. A rescue mission, a deep space probe, maybe even a message from Earth. But this signal was too complex, too advanced. The mathematical proofs it contained were beyond current human knowledge. Some of the constants were calculated to hundreds of decimal places, far more precisely than Earth's best computers could manage. She was looking at evidence of alien intelligence. The realization should have excited her. First contact with an alien species was the dream of every scientist, the greatest discovery in human history. But Elena felt only fear. She was alone on a dead world with failing equipment and limited supplies. If these beings were hostile, she had no way to defend herself. If they were friendly, she had no way to convince them she was worth saving. Elena decoded more of the signal over the following days. Between the mathematical sequences, she found what appeared to be star charts. The positions were marked with incredible precision, showing stellar movements over thousands of years. Whoever created this signal had been watching the galaxy for a very long time. More disturbing were the sections she could not decode at all. Large portions of the signal followed patterns that made no sense to her. The mathematical relationships were too complex, the data structures too alien. Elena began to understand that she was looking at intelligence so far beyond human comprehension that she might never fully understand what they were trying to communicate. But she had to try. Elena spent 3 days crafting her response. She included everything she thought might be important: the location of Earth, human mathematical knowledge, basic information about human biology and culture. She also included her personal story, the tale of the last human on a dead world who had spent 7 years keeping hope alive. The message used every bit of power her station could generate. Elena rerouted energy from life support, disabled the backup systems, and pushed her transmitter far beyond safe operating levels. The broadcast lasted only 30 seconds, but it contained everything she had to say about humanity. Then she waited. The response came 18 hours later, and it changed everything Elena thought she knew about her situation. The alien signal began with her own mathematical sequences, repeated back to her with perfect accuracy. Then it expanded on them, showing mathematical relationships Elena had never seen before. The star charts were updated to show real-time stellar positions with impossible precision. And then came the section that made Elena's blood run cold. Embedded in the signal were detailed scans of her planet. Surface topology, atmospheric composition, geological structure, all mapped to a level of detail that surpassed her own 7 years of research. The scans showed the location of her research station, marked as a point of interest. They showed the thermal signatures of her power systems. Most terrifying of all, they showed a single life sign moving around inside the station. The aliens knew exactly where she was. They had been watching her. Elena printed out the decoded scans and spread them across her workbench. The level of detail was incredible. The aliens knew about the underground cave system she had discovered. They had mapped the mineral deposits better than her own geological surveys. They even knew about the small garden she had tried to grow in the station's lower level, the one that had failed after 2 months. How long had they been watching? Had they seen the evacuation 7 years ago? Did they know what had happened to the rest of humanity? The signal continued to arrive in regular bursts over the following days. Each transmission contained more information, layer upon layer of data that pushed Elena's understanding to its limits. She began to see patterns in the alien mathematics. hints of technologies that defied physics as she understood it. And she began to notice something else. Embedded in the complex data streams were what appeared to be navigation calculations. Course corrections, velocity adjustments, approach vectors. The aliens were not just watching from a distance anymore. They were coming to Kepler 442c. Elena calculated the timing based on the navigation data. If her analysis was correct, the aliens would arrive in approximately 36 days. She had just over a month to prepare for first contact with an intelligence that possessed technology beyond human comprehension. She looked around her small research station, her home for 7 years, her sanctuary against the hostile world outside. Suddenly it felt very fragile and very small. Elena had survived 7 years alone on a dead planet, through determination and ingenuity. Now she faced a challenge that would test everything she had learned about survival. The aliens were coming, and Elena had no idea if they were coming to help her or to study her. Either way, her long isolation was about to end. After 7 years of complete solitude, the last human on Kepler 442c was about to meet something that was definitely not human. Elena began to prepare. She had 36 days to get ready for the most important moment in human history. She would not waste a single one of them. Elena had 36 days to prepare for the arrival of beings whose technology was far beyond anything humans had ever achieved. She began by making a list of everything she knew about the aliens from their signals. They were excellent mathematicians. They had advanced scanning technology that could analyze her planet from space. They had been watching her for an unknown amount of time, and they were now actively traveling toward Kepler 442c. What she did not know was far more disturbing. She had no idea what they looked like, what they wanted, or whether they viewed humans as equals, pets, or threats. Elena decided to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. She began by fortifying her research station. The building had been designed to protect against the planet's harsh environment, not against potentially hostile aliens, but it was all she had. She started with the exterior defenses. Elena moved her mining equipment closer to the station and set up motion sensors around the perimeter. The mining laser was not designed as a weapon, but it could cut through solid rock. If the aliens proved hostile, it might buy her a few extra minutes. She also rigged explosive charges at key points around the station, using chemicals from her laboratory. She hoped she would never need them, but Elena had learned that hope was not a survival strategy. Inside the station, Elena reinforced the critical systems. She moved backup power cells to a hidden compartment in the lower level, and installed manual overrides on all the electronic locks. If the aliens could hack her computer systems as easily as they seemed to scan her planet, she wanted ways to control her own station without depending on electronics. The communication array received special attention. Elena installed recording devices that would automatically transmit everything to a buried data cache if the station's main systems failed. Whatever happened during first contact, she wanted to leave a record for any humans who might find this place in the future. 28 days before the estimated arrival, Elena made a disturbing discovery. The alien signals were becoming stronger and more frequent, which suggested the ship was getting closer. But when she analyzed the latest transmissions, she found new types of data embedded in the mathematical sequences. The aliens were sending biological information. Elena stared at the decoded sequences in disbelief. Hidden within the complex mathematics were chemical formulas for amino acids, protein structures, and DNA base pairs. The aliens were transmitting detailed information about human biology. The implications terrified her. How did they know so much about human physiology? Had they captured other humans somewhere? Were they planning some kind of biological weapon? Or were they simply trying to understand what they would be dealing with when they arrived? Elena ran the biological data through every analysis program she had. The information was incredibly detailed and completely accurate. The protein structures matched human biochemistry perfectly. The DNA sequences included markers for everything from blood type to genetic predisposition for certain diseases. The aliens knew more about human biology than most human doctors. She tried to convince herself that this was a good sign. Maybe the aliens were preparing medical assistance. Maybe they wanted to help her survive until rescue arrived. But Elena's scientific training would not let her ignore the darker possibilities. Advanced biological knowledge could be used to create targeted diseases, mind control substances, or worse. Elena decided she needed leverage. If the aliens were as advanced as they seemed, there was nothing she could do to stop them if they chose to harm her. But she might be able to make herself valuable enough to keep alive. She began broadcasting her own biological data back to the aliens, but with a twist. Elena sent information about human physiology, but she also included data about the planet itself. She transmitted everything she had learned about Kepler 442c during her 7 years of research: geological surveys, atmospheric analysis, magnetic field measurements, and seismic data. The message was clear. Elena was the expert on this world. If the aliens wanted to land safely and operate on the planet's surface, they needed her knowledge. She was not just a random human to be studied or eliminated. She was a valuable resource. The aliens' response came faster than Elena expected. Instead of the usual mathematical sequences, they sent back her own geological data with corrections and additions. The corrections were minor but significant. Measurements she had missed, underground structures she had not detected, magnetic anomalies she had misinterpreted. Elena realized with growing amazement that the aliens had been conducting their own survey of Kepler 442c, probably for much longer than her 7 years on the planet. They knew this world better than she did, which meant they did not need her for planetary data. So why were they coming here? 18 days before arrival, Elena got her answer. The latest alien transmission contained something that made her hands shake as she decoded it: star charts showing the positions of human colonies. The charts were terrifyingly accurate. Elena could identify Earth, the Mars settlements, the research stations around Jupiter, and even the distant colonies that had been established during her lifetime. Every major human presence in space was marked on the alien star charts, but something was wrong. The charts showed human activity as it had been 20 years ago. The recent colonies were missing. The expansion programs that should have been launched during Elena's time on Kepler 442c were not represented. The aliens' data about human civilization was out of date. Elena felt a cold dread settling in her chest as she studied the charts. If the aliens had been watching humanity for decades, why did their information stop 20 years ago? Where were the records of recent human activity? She cross-referenced the dates with her own knowledge of human space exploration. 20 years ago was when the first deep space colonies were established. It was also when humanity first made contact with another intelligent species, a brief radio exchange with beings from the Vega system that had raised hopes for peaceful interstellar relations. Those hopes had been crushed. 6 months later, when the Vega signals stopped completely, Earth's attempts to re-establish contact failed. The official explanation was equipment failure or natural disaster, but some scientists had suggested a darker possibility, that something had happened to the Vega civilization. Elena began to see a terrifying pattern. The aliens knew about human civilization, but only up to the point when humanity had started making contact with other species. They had detailed biological information about humans, and now they were coming to investigate the last known human presence in this region of space. Elena was not being rescued. She was being studied. The realization changed everything about her preparations. Elena stopped thinking about first contact as a diplomatic encounter between equals. Instead, she began planning for survival against beings who might view her as a specimen to be examined. She created hidden caches of supplies throughout the station and in the surrounding area. If the aliens took control of her base, she wanted resources scattered around the planet that she could use to stay alive and free. Elena also prepared multiple escape routes and identified defensible positions in the planet's cave systems. Most importantly, she began working on a way to send a warning to any surviving humans. Elena rigged her communication array to broadcast a compressed data burst containing everything she had learned about the aliens. The transmission would be triggered automatically if her life signs stopped, or if she failed to enter a daily code into the system. If the aliens killed her, her death would not be silent. 10 days before the estimated arrival, Elena's seismic equipment detected something impossible. The readings showed a massive object entering the planet's gravitational field, but her visual sensors could not detect anything in space. The aliens had some kind of stealth technology that made their ship invisible to normal observation. Elena watched her instruments as the invisible ship moved into orbit around Kepler 442c. The gravitational effects were enormous. Whatever. was up there was the size of a small moon, but her cameras and telescopes showed only empty space. The ship established a stable orbit directly above Elena's research station. It was not hiding anymore. It was announcing its presence and making clear that Elena was the focus of its attention. Elena spent her last week of solitude checking and rechecking her preparations. She tested her weapons, verified her supply caches, and rehearsed her escape routes. She also spent long hours thinking about what she would say during first contact. How do you communicate with beings so advanced that they can make entire starships invisible? How do you convince them that humanity deserves to survive? How do you represent your entire species when you might be the last human they ever meet? Elena decided on honesty. She would tell the aliens exactly what she was: a scientist who had been stranded on a dead world and had spent 7 years proving that humans do not give up. She would show them that humanity's greatest strength was not technology or military power, but the refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. On the final day, Elena suited up and walked outside to look at the sky. Somewhere above her, invisible to her eyes, was a ship full of beings whose intentions she could not guess. In a few hours, her 7 years of isolation would end, and humanity's first real test of interstellar diplomacy would begin. Elena woke up on day 36 to complete silence. The constant hum of her station's systems continued, but the electromagnetic interference that had been building for weeks was gone. Her instruments showed clear readings across all frequencies. Whatever had been approaching Kepler 442c had arrived. She walked to the observation deck and looked up at the rust-colored sky. Elena saw nothing unusual, but her gravitational sensors indicated a massive object directly overhead. The invisible ship was there waiting. Elena returned to her main console and began her daily system checks. Everything appeared normal until she reached the communication array. Her screens were displaying data she had not requested: complex, holographic projections that seemed to emerge directly from her computer systems. The aliens were inside her networks. Elena watched in fascination and terror as the displays showed her information she had never seen before: star charts with incredible detail, mathematical proofs that hurt her head to look at, and images of technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The aliens were demonstrating their capabilities, showing her exactly how far beyond human understanding their science had progressed. Then the images changed. Elena found herself looking at recordings of her own activities over the past 7 years. She watched herself repairing equipment during storms, working in her laboratory, even sleeping in her small quarters. The aliens had been watching her constantly, recording every detail of her struggle to survive. The recordings were not random. They showed specific moments, times when Elena had solved difficult problems, made repairs under dangerous conditions, or refused to give up when her situation seemed hopeless. The aliens had been studying human determination and resilience by watching her. A new image appeared on Elena's screens. This one was different from the others. It moved and responded to her presence. Elena realized she was looking at one of the aliens themselves. The being was unlike anything she had imagined. It appeared to be made of living crystal, its surface shifting and changing color as it communicated. The entity had no fixed form that Elena could identify. Sometimes it looked roughly humanoid, other times it resembled a complex geometric pattern. But the intelligence behind those shifting colors was unmistakable. The alien began to communicate, not through sound or text, but by directly interfacing with Elena's mind. The experience was overwhelming, pure information flowing into her consciousness faster than she could process it. Elena felt like she was drowning in knowledge, struggling to understand concepts that her human brain was not designed to handle. Gradually, she began to make sense of what the alien was telling her. The being was not a single individual, but part of a collective consciousness that spanned thousands of connected minds. They called themselves the Archivists, and they had been traveling the galaxy for millions of years, recording the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The Archivists explained that they did not interfere with other species. They simply watched and recorded. They had observed the development of thousands of intelligent races, documenting their achievements and their failures. Their ship was essentially a vast library, containing the complete history of galactic civilization. Elena learned that humanity had caught the Archivists' attention because of their unusual response to adversity. Most species, when faced with impossible challenges, eventually gave up and accepted defeat. Humans were different. They kept fighting even when logic suggested surrender was the only option. The archivists had been monitoring human expansion into space, fascinated by this stubborn refusal to quit. Elena's 7-year survival on Kepler 442c was simply the latest example of this human trait. The archivist wanted to understand what drove humans to keep going when other species would have given up long ago. But then the alien shared information that made Elena's heart stop. Earth had gone silent 3 years ago. The human colonies had stopped expanding. Communication between the major settlements had ceased. Something catastrophic had happened to humanity, while Elena was isolated on her dead world. The archivists showed Elena recordings from their observation posts throughout human space. She watched in horror as human colonies went dark one by one. The final transmissions spoke of an invasion by beings from beyond the galactic rim, entities so hostile and advanced that humanity's best defenses were useless against them. Earth's last transmission had been a simple message broadcast on all frequencies. We did not surrender. Remember us. Elena felt tears running down her face as she realized the truth. She was not just stranded on Kepler 442c. She might actually be the last living human in the universe. While she had been fighting to survive on a dead world, her entire species had been wiped out by alien invaders. The archivist's communication continued, and Elena learned more about humanity's final war. The enemy had been called the Devourers, beings that consumed entire civilizations, stripping planets of all life and resources. Humanity had fought them for 2 years, using every weapon and strategy they could devise. But the Devourers were too powerful, too numerous, and too alien for human tactics to be effective. The war had ended with humanity's complete defeat, but the archivists had been impressed by how humans had conducted themselves during the final battles. Even when facing certain death, human soldiers had continued fighting. Even when their worlds were burning, human scientists had kept working on new weapons. Even when hope was gone, humans had refused to give up. The archivist explained that this was why they had come to Kepler 442c. Elena represented something unique in their vast database of galactic civilizations. The last example of a species that truly did not know how to surrender. They wanted to preserve that knowledge before it was lost forever. Elena listened to all of this in stunned silence. The weight of being possibly the last human alive was crushing. But as the initial shock faded, she began to think about what the archivists were offering her. The alien continued its communication, presenting Elena with a choice. She could join the archivists on their ship, becoming part of their collective consciousness. Her human memories and perspective would be preserved forever in their vast library. She would be immortal, traveling the galaxy and witnessing the rise of new civilizations. Her knowledge of human determination and resilience would be shared with countless future species. But there was another option. The archivists had detected faint signals from the outer rim of the galaxy, transmissions that might indicate surviving human settlements. The signals were too weak and distant to be certain, but they followed patterns consistent with human technology. Elena could choose to stay on Kepler 442c and use the archivists' advanced technology to boost a signal powerful enough to reach those distant transmissions. She could send a message to any surviving humans, letting them know they were not alone in the universe. But choosing this path would mean giving up her chance at rescue and immortality. Elena would remain on the dead world, possibly forever. The choice was presented without pressure or time limits. The archivists would wait for Elena to decide. They had waited millions of years to study civilizations. They could wait a little longer for one human to make the most important decision of her life. Elena asked for time to think. The archivist agreed and withdrew from her mind, leaving her alone with her thoughts for the first time in hours. The alien projections faded from her screens, but Elena knew they were still watching, still waiting. She walked to her observation deck and looked out at the barren landscape of Kepler 442c. This world had been her prison for 7 years, but it had also been her home. She had learned to read its moods, to predict its storms, to find beauty in its harsh geology. In a strange way, she had grown to love this dead planet that had tested her strength every single day. Elena thought about the choice before her, immortality and knowledge beyond imagining, or staying on a dying world to serve as a beacon for humans who might not even exist. The logical choice was obvious: join the archivists and preserve human knowledge for future civilizations. But Elena had not survived 7 years on Kepler 4i42c by making logical choices. She had survived by being stubborn, by refusing to give up even when giving up made perfect sense. She had survived by being human. Elena made her decision. She walked back to the communication console and sent a simple message to the archivists: "I choose hope." The archivists' response to Elena's choice came immediately, the crystalline being materialized on her screens again, its surface shifting through colors that Elena was beginning to recognize as expressions of emotion. The alien seemed pleased by her decision, though Elena could not be sure if pleasure was the right word for what a collective consciousness might feel. The archivist explained that Elena's choice perfectly demonstrated the human trait they had been studying. Most species, when offered immortality and unlimited knowledge, would choose personal survival over uncertain hope. But Elena had chosen to sacrifice her own welfare for the possibility that other humans might still be alive somewhere in the galaxy. Over the next several hours, the archivists shared their advanced technology with Elena. They transmitted detailed instructions for building a communication array far more powerful than anything humans had ever constructed. The technology was based on quantum field manipulation, allowing signals to propagate across galactic distances without degradation. Elena worked feverishly to understand the alien designs. The mathematics were incredibly complex, but the archivists had adapted their instructions for human comprehension. They provided step-by-step procedures for modifying her existing equipment and building new components from materials available on Kepler 442c. The construction process took 3 weeks. Elena had to mine rare minerals from deep underground, synthesize exotic compounds in her laboratory, and reshape metal components with precision tools the archivists helped her build. The work was exhausting and dangerous, but Elena pushed forward with determination, born from 7 years of survival experience. During the construction phase, the archivists shared more of their vast knowledge with Elena. She learned about the rise and fall of countless civilizations, the patterns that governed galactic evolution, and the rare species that had achieved true greatness among the stars. Most importantly, she learned about the signals they had detected from the galactic rim. The transmissions were indeed consistent with human technology, but they were faint and intermittent. The archivists estimated there might be as few as a dozen surviving human settlements scattered across thousands of light years. These survivors were probably isolated, cut off from each other, believing they were the last remnants of their species. Elena's enhanced communication array would be powerful enough to reach all of them simultaneously. Her message would propagate across the galaxy for centuries, serving as a permanent beacon for any humans who might still be searching for others of their kind. As Elena worked on the final components of the array, she also prepared the message she would transmit. This would be humanity's last will and testament, preserved in the most powerful communication system ever built. Elena wanted to make it count. She included everything she thought future humans would need to know. The location of Earth and the major human colonies, preserved in case the survivors had lost track of their origins. The complete cultural and scientific heritage of humanity, compressed into data files that could rebuild human civilization from scratch. Stories of human achievement, art, literature, and music that represented the best of what the species had accomplished. But most importantly, Elena included the story of humanity's final war against the Devourers. She wanted the survivors to know that Earth had not surrendered, that humans had fought to the very end with courage and determination. She wanted them to understand that they were the inheritors of a legacy of resistance that stretched back to the beginning of human civilization. The message also contained practical information. Elena included the archivist's star charts, showing safe routes through the galaxy and the locations of habitable worlds. She provided technological data that could help the survivors rebuild and expand, and she gave them coordinates for Kepler 442c in case anyone ever wanted to find the place where the last beacon of humanity had been established. When the communication array was finally complete, Elena stood before the massive structure that now dominated her research station. The device was beautiful in its alien design, crystalline components that seemed to bend light around themselves, quantum field generators that hummed with barely contained energy, and transmission arrays that reached high into Kepler 442c's thin atmosphere. The archivists had kept their part of the bargain. They provided Elena with advanced life support technology that would keep her alive indefinitely. The new systems were self-repairing and incredibly efficient, designed to function for thousands of years without maintenance. Elena would survive to tend her beacon, no matter how long it took for other humans to respond. The night before the first transmission, Elena sat in her observation deck and composed her final log entry. She wrote about her 7 years of isolation, her encounter with the archivists, and her decision to remain on Kepler 442c as humanity's guardian. She tried to capture what it meant to be human, the stubborn refusal to give up, the willingness to sacrifice for others, and the faith that tomorrow might be better than today. The transmission began at dawn. Elena activated the communication array and watched as her message began its journey across the galaxy. The quantum field generators created a pulse of organized energy, more powerful than anything ever produced by human technology. Elena's message would travel faster than light, reaching the galactic rim in a matter of years instead of millennia. The transmission continued for 12 hours, repeating Elena's message in every conceivable format and frequency. When it was finished, Elena had created a signal that would be detectable by any human technology anywhere in the galaxy. Her beacon would continue broadcasting automatically, sending out its message of hope and remembrance once every month, for as long as the equipment functioned. The archivists remained in orbit for 3 more days, completing their study of Elena and her message. They recorded everything for their vast library: the construction of the beacon, Elena's decision-making process, and the content of humanity's final transmission. When they finally prepared to leave, the lead archivist shared one last communication with Elena. The alien collective expressed something Elena interpreted as admiration. In all their millions of years of observation, they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Other races had been stronger, smarter, or more technologically advanced. But no other species had combined intelligence with such absolute refusal to accept defeat. The archivists promised that if any humans responded to Elena's signal, they would ensure she was reunited with her species. They also promised that humanity's story would be preserved in their library forever, serving as an inspiration for future civilizations that faced seemingly impossible challenges. As the invisible ship departed, Elena felt a strange sense of peace. She was still alone on a dead world, but she was no longer isolated. Her message was traveling across the galaxy, carrying the voice of humanity to anyone who might be listening. She had become the keeper of her species' memory and the guardian of their hope. Elena returned to her daily routine, but everything was different now. She maintained the beacon, monitored the galactic frequencies for any response, and continued her research on Kepler 442c, but she also spent time each day thinking about the humans who might receive her message, scattered, survivors on distant worlds who would learn they were not alone in the universe. Days turned into weeks, then months. Elena's routine became meditation, each task performed with the knowledge that she was serving something greater than herself. She was the last link in an unbroken chain of human determination that stretched back to the earliest days of the species. And then, 8 months after the first transmission, Elena's communication array detected something that made her heart race. A response, faint and distant but unmistakably human in origin. Someone had heard her message. The signal came from the galactic rim, just as the archivists had predicted. It was weak and took several days to decode completely, but when Elena finally understood what she was reading, she wept with joy. The message was simple. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the colony ship New Horizon. We are alive. We are coming home. Thank you for not letting us be forgotten." Elena immediately began preparing a response, her hands shaking with excitement. She was no longer the last human in the universe. Somewhere among the stars, her people were still fighting, still hoping, still refusing to give up. Elena sent back everything she could: star charts, safe routes through space, locations of habitable worlds, and most importantly, the coordinates of other beacon sites she had established around Kepler 442c. She told Captain Chen and her crew that humanity's light was still burning, that Earth's children had not been forgotten. and that the long journey home could finally begin. Over the following months, more responses arrived. A research station in the Magellanic Clouds, a small colony orbiting a red dwarf star, a group of scientists who had been studying black holes when the Devourers attacked. Each message brought news of human survival, human determination, and human hope. Elena coordinated them all, serving as the central hub for humanity's resurrection. She provided navigation data, shared resources and technology, and helped isolated groups find each other. Her beacon had become the foundation for rebuilding human civilization.